येषां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोतं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि। Namaste and welcome to Kaivalya Yoga Gurukulam or KYG for yet another class in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I'm sitting in the holy premises of a very beautiful, quaint little temple called the Sri Sivagurunathar, where Shiva is worshipped as the Guru of Brahma and of all the deities. More of this temple in another video. In this class, we shall learn about the next sutra where Patanjali takes us and defines what is the other samadhi. In the previous sutra, we learned about saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ samadhi. Saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ samadhi is vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita. So all of this took us to that level of sabhija or saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ samadhi. And now Patanjali introduces us to the next level. So the sutra goes like this. Virāmapratyayābhyāsapūrvaḥ saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ. Virāmapratyayā abhyāsapūrvaḥ saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ anya. So this is how the sutra can be broken into 4 terms. Virāmapratyayā, abhyāsa pūrva, saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ and anya. Let's start with the last word here, anya. Patanjali refers to the highest state of samadhi as anya. Anya means the other one. The other one. It's very interesting to note that we call it saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ samadhi as we studied in the previous one, and Patanjali had a name for it. And the other one, we call it asamprajñāta samadhi because Vyasa told us this word anya refers to the asamprajñāta samadhi. But it is very interesting that Patanjali does not give a title to the samadhi because there is really no other way to describe this. So Vyasa also uses the term asamprajñāta samadhi. That's how we know the word anya refers to the asamprajñāta samadhi, which is also nirbhija, where there is no seed as well. Okay? So it is very interesting to note that there is really no name for the ultimate state. Saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ is a name we can assign because it's cognitive state. This is ultra-cognitive, beyond our cognition, and therefore it cannot be labeled, it cannot have a state. And therefore Patanjali says, anya, the other one. Thanks to Vyasa, we know that the other one is actually the asamprajñāta samadhi. Alright, so we determined that. So Patanjali is going to describe the other state. What is that? Here he says, virāmapratyayā, the first way he starts the sutra, virāmapratyayā. What is virāmapratyayā? Virāma means cessation. The cessation of all the vrittis. Pratyaya is the cause of that cessation. So we use this as a term together. So the cause of all the cessation of all the vrittis, because the ultimate state is where there are no vrittis, right? That's where that's what we learned in the definition of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, where he says yogas chitta vritti nirodha. So the ultimate state has no vrittis. So virāmapratyayā, the cause of all that cessation is what? We'll come to that. So hold on to that thought. Then he says abhyāsa pūrva. let me pause here for a second. I think the priest of this temple is actually sweeping the entire courtyard, so I have to give him respect and allow him to do his job. So I'll take this thought from this point. All right, so let us take from where we left off. Virāmapratyayā. Virāma is cessation. Pratyaya is cause of the cessation, cause of modifications and cause of the cessation of modifications. That's how I would interpret this term virāmapratyayā. The cause of the cessation of all these modifications. What is the cause? Abhyāsapūrvaḥ. The earlier practice. Abhyasa means practice. Pūrva means the earlier practice. Earlier he has defined a particular practice which we need to do to arrive at this stage. So the cause of all the cessation or modification is because of an earlier practice. Now what is that earlier practice? It is the previous sutra? No. Here, this is where we refer to Vyasa's commentary. So Vyasa says this earlier practice that Patanjali is referring to is the parama vairagyam, the supreme form of desirelessness. We came that in the earlier sutras as gunavaitrishnam. Gunavaitrishnam is where we get detached from the gunas itself. So that is the param vairagyam. So when we understand and practice that param vairagyam, it's not a conscious practice, but nevertheless Patanjali mentions when that comes in place, then anya, then the other state happens. So virāmapratyayābhyāsapūrvaḥ. Now we need to understand this in context of the previous sutras, because in the previous sutra we did vitarga samadhi, then we said vichara samadhi, ananda samadhi, asmita. The ananda and the asmita, the I-ness or the amness, however you want to call it, at a very subtle level there is the I existing, not at a conscious level. The I exists at a subtler level. That I gets dropped off. That is at param vairagyam. So what happens at that level is that understanding of the I as different from the cosmic entity, the Purusha, that understanding, not at a conscious level, but a deep level of awareness arises. That is what is called Purusha Khyate or Viveka Khyate. We touched upon this in the previous sutras as well. Purusha Khyate, the knowledge of that Purusha. Viveka Khyate is the knowledge of that final discrimination, the final discernment where, oh, even this is separate, and therefore the asmita, the amness is dropped. That awareness, that dropping of that amness is not a conscious thing. That's why I always say it's a matter of grace, because I will be just talking through my hat, if you will, if I were to describe what that is, because I have not experienced that. But nevertheless, we need to understand it. At least I like to have a roadmap in front of me, and therefore this attempt to explain that. That state, that understanding comes at a much deeper level. That is why it is called Viveka Khyate. So in the Indian context, in the culture, there is an initiation into self-enlightenment, a mantra called the Gayatri mantra, which many of you may be aware of, that prays for the enlightenment of the buddhi at a very deep intuitive level. That enlightenment happens. That is where Viveka Khyati comes in. So at that stage of enlightenment, the discernment happens. And once that comes, then Purusha takes over. Then we know the ultimate cause, the amness, and we drop that. Okay, so Vyasa is referring to that. So when he says, how is that happening? Because of abhyāsapūrvaḥ. That earlier practice has to be in place. What practice? Param vairagyam. So gunavaitrishnam, when we detach ourselves from all qualities, that happens in the ananda anugamata and the ananda state and the asmita. Asmita anugamat and ananda anugamat. It's only in those states where the gunavaitrishnam begins to happen. In other words, the detachment from the gunas itself, the param vairagyam begins to manifest itself, and it is complete when the amness is dropped or the I-ness is dropped. Then he says, virāmapratyayābhyāsapūrvaḥ. He calls it anya. We would have stopped with this definition, but Patanjali interestingly mentions one more term. The sutra is not complete because the sutra goes like this: virāmapratyayābhyāsapūrvaḥ saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ. Saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ. Anya. So anya we know, it's the other one. Saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ. What is Patanjali telling us here? It's a very interesting concept. He says at that level, though the amness is dropped and the asamprajñāta samādhi has happened, even at that state, there are latent impressions that will remain. And that will eventually cease, that will go away. But even in that state, there are latent impressions that remain. Now this might come as a news for us, right? Because we just thought, wait a minute, all the chitta vrittis have gone. Now what else are we talking about? The way I've understood this is the analogy of, let's say, a bell. I'm in a temple and the temple bell, the gong, if you will. There is the gong, the bell rings, right? And then you hit once, twice, thrice, and you stop. But when you stop, the sound of the bell doesn't stop immediately. It kind of slowly fades, right? That fading away is what Patanjali is referring to here, helping us to understand that even at that state, there are these samskaras, the impressions, which are latent impressions, which will slowly find its expression and fade away. There is no more fertilization of those samskaras back. But they nevertheless exist at that stage. Okay? So it is just for our understanding. Now we could get intellectual and argue about the hows and whys and the do's and don'ts and all of that, but it is just for understanding at this point. So it brings us to the question of what is this samskaras? What is this? What is he talking about? And so I think it is apt for us to touch upon three aspects of karma. If we understand that, we will understand what he means by this latent impressions. Karma are actions that we do, and then action leads to reaction, and then it goes on, right? That's how we are caught up in the cycle of karmic cycles, we call it. Rebirth and birth are very broad terms, but basically it is karma. If once a thought dies, I have fulfilled that desire, another one comes up, I chase that, I fulfill that. So one thing leads to the other. One thought leads to another, one word leads to another word, one action leads to another word, and we are caught up in this karmic cycle. So this is like the bell going on in the temple. So when it stops, the karmic cycle ends, but not abruptly, so it will slowly fade away. And that is what he means by latent impressions. What are those latent impressions in this context of karma? So to understand this concept of karma, I use an analogy. So allow me to share that with you, because it helps me understand it very clearly. It's about a warrior. He has a bow, an arrow in his hand, and he has a quiver and all the arrows in his quiver. There are a lot of arrows in his quiver. He is holding one in his hand and he has a bow. He is a warrior in action. So he has let out a lot of arrows already. He's having the other one, it's strung to the bow and ready to let go. So let's imagine that, picture that, okay? Create that vikalpa vritti, if you will, because that vrittis liberate us, because it helps us understand, correct? So he has got one arrow in his hand, ready to let go. He has already let go a series of arrows towards his target. He has a bunch of arrows in his quiver. Understanding karma is drawing upon this analogy. So the first type of karma is sanchita karma. Karmas are thoughts that have come from the past, thoughts, words, actions, all a collection of samskaras, if you will, and vasanas that have come from the past, that is sitting in the quiver, waiting to be released. The saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ that Patanjali talks about, the samskaras, that latent impressions, is referring to this. The latent impressions that we carry from birth after birth. So they are sitting in the quiver here. These are the arrows. Sanchita karma. The latent impressions are sanchita karma. Okay? Then comes prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma are the fruits that we are reaping currently of actions that are done, that are already committed. In other words, in this analogy, the arrows that have already left the bow, he's been firing arrow after the arrow because this is a warrior in action. So all the arrows that he has let go, he cannot take it back. A word that comes out of your mouth, it is said, right? Or an arrow that leaves the bow, I guess. There is a quote, something like that. Both of them cannot be taken back. And therefore, this arrow has left the bow. In other words, it is going to reach its destination and we have to face the consequences of whatever that arrow does. In other words, what we are doing now, what you are experiencing now, if you are listening to this video, if you're sitting in a chair and listening to it, if you're sitting in a sofa and listening to it, all of this is a result of an arrow that has already been sent. So prarabdha karma is the karma that you're currently reaping. Good or bad, whatever it is a result of already things that have happened. Every time we used to sit at Baba's feet and we would be spending, sometimes he will say, this is all your prarabdham, this is all your prarabdham. Means what you're getting now is you're reaping the results of your action. Then comes the third one. What is the third one? Agami karma. Agami karma is the arrow in his hand, the present action that you are going to undertake. He's going to let go of the arrow. So he has a choice not to let go of the arrow, or where he has to let go of the arrow, how he has to let go of the arrow, what attitude he can have when he lets go of his arrow, right? So all of that choice is right. At this moment, he has not let go of the arrow, so there is no reaction to this action. This is an action waiting to be performed, a karma waiting to happen, which is in his hand at this moment. Right? I hope it's not too confusing. Arrows in the quiver, sanchita karma. They are there, waiting to manifest. Arrow in the hand, agami karma. The karma in your hand, at this moment, being manifested at this moment, not fully manifested yet. Prarabdha karma is arrows that have already left the bow, for which we have to reap the consequences. So the saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ is the latent impressions sitting in the quiver and the arrows that have already gone out. Nobody can escape the consequences of those actions. Nobody can. And therefore, even at that enlightened state, what scholars would say is, what was that karma then which has left, for which consequences he has to face and let that fade? What is that kind of karma? At that level, that all the abhyāsa he has done, all the practices that he has done becomes those karmas. Right? Even the dropping of the I amness and all of that is a karma. So we are now talking at a very subtle level. Because that is a karma that has left the bow, that consequences will be there. Whatever that consequences may mean, right? It will go away. That will also remain and go away. This latent impressions are arrows that never leave the quiver, and therefore they will just stay there. They will rust, they will fade, and then they will just be there. It is of no consequence. The warrior does not take ownership of that quiver. He lets it down. He puts it down. It's like grains in the shed that holds all the grains, seeds, right? Those are seeds that never get planted in the soil. They stay there. Those seeds dry up. They never used. The seeds were there for the longest time. But in the stage of enlightenment, since there is no ownership, nobody claims ownership for these arrows, or nobody claims ownership of the seeds. Nobody plants them, and therefore the seeds dry up, the arrows just rust and just stay there. That's all, they're gone. And therefore, gone in the sense they are useless. After a while, they become useless. So they don't affect, but it takes time for that latent impressions to die away, right? So when Patanjali introduces us to that, we need to be clear what is he talking about. Even in that state of asamprajñāta samadhi, there are these latent impressions that will eventually go away. Patanjali takes time to explain this in the further sutras. But for us to understand that when moment I attain samadhi, what will happen is a question everybody asks, right? What happens to the ultimate state? All modifications cease, but the latent impressions will continue, and eventually they also will cease, and the state of Kaivalya will be complete, where the Purusha withdraws completely into himself. This is my understanding. It's a very beautiful, beautiful concept to understand. Patanjali does not mince words. I mean, he's hidden a lot of meanings inside these aphorisms, but he does not mince words. He makes it very clear that even at that stage, there are these latent impressions. And Vyasa in his commentary explains that that state can come with only one thing. He makes it very clear. I summarized Vyasa's own summary, right? Because I take only the key words and explain. Param vairagyam. Param vairagyam, the supreme state of desirelessness. What is that state? And I want to leave you with this thought. That state is where I am detached from my gunas, all the qualities, even the amness, the I amness, everything is dropped. Param vairagyam. That is the ultimate state. When that happens, asamprajñāta samadhi manifests. And when that manifestation happens, all modifications cease, virāmapratyayā. However, there will be some saṃskāras that will slowly fade away. That is the understanding of this beautiful sutra. Virāmapratyayā abhyāsapūrvaḥ saṃskāraśeṣo'nyaḥ. As always, I am so grateful for being given this opportunity to share these thoughts with you all from the holy presence of these temples. When I sit in the courtyard of these temples, an inspiration comes over me, and I allow the divine to channel through me and share these wisdom in a manner that I can understand, and hopefully you can understand as well. And I'm sure you do too. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to be of service. Until we meet again, stay blessed, stay inspired. Let us continue this beautiful journey of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the journey within, the journey towards enlightenment. Namaste.
Kaivalya